Today in our little bite-sized PD, we're going to focus on providing feedback to your students. So in this session, you're going to discover, again, what is feedback, its purpose, ideas for providing quality feedback, and making time for feedback. So I want you to kind of just take a moment and pause and think about what are the ways that you give feedback to your students. So we might want to think about what is feedback and its purpose. So you might be thinking about all the different ways that you give feedback, but let's make sure you understand what kind of feedback you're giving and the purpose. So obviously we know that feedback is responding to our students' performance or behavior. So we're either responding to how well they're doing in class or how well they're behaving towards maybe each other, their growth mindset, or any of those kind of ideas that we think around behavior. So our goal, though, is to encourage students to use that feedback, whatever feedback we're giving them, to make some kind of personal growth or progress towards some kind of achievement. So what we want to make sure we do is we want to make sure that our feedback is providing clarification to the standards we want the students to master or mastering our expectations, especially when it comes to behavior. So what should effective feedback look like? So there's lots of different educators who have studied feedback and determined its effectiveness and how it impacts the student. But these were the 6 top ideas. One is you want to build relationships with it. So if you're giving good, high quality feedback, you're also going to build a relationship with your students that they actually care. They care about the feedback they're given and they want to intrinsically make improvements. And it usually helps out with a lot of the behaviors in the classroom when you have a good relationship with your student and you can give good quality feedback. You want to make sure that your feedback is consistent. So not just, when they do a big project or when they've misbehaved, you want to make sure you're consistent with the feedback. So if you have a student that has maybe an intervention plan for behavior, you want to maybe, have a way that you consistently give feedback each day, what they did really well, what they need to work on. If they had a really bad day, again, if you're consistent, you can go back and say, remember yesterday you had a really good day, and let's think about the ways that it made a good day. So let's think about what we need to use for today. And if we're talking about academics and achievement for our standards and learning targets, we want to be consistent with it too. And we want to be consistent of what the feedback looks like and have our students make sure they understand what you're looking for. So we also want to make sure, in addition to consistent, it's timely and ongoing. So they kind of go hand in hand, the consistent and timely ongoing. So you don't want to, stop every 2 seconds to give feedback, but you want to make sure it's timely, that it's not something that is going to be done at the end of the week, once in a while. So when we're talking about timely, it could also mean that we're thinking about, okay, my students handed in their homework. I want to sit there and grade it. I'm not going to grade it 2 days later to give them feedback because I need them to know what they need to improve upon so they can build on for tomorrow. So this especially happens in math. When we know that everything that we do in math is sequential and it spirals, we want to make sure that we're giving that timely feedback so they're not getting to the end of the unit and still struggling because they didn't know what they need to do to improve. So the other thing is actionable. So again, we want our students to be able to sit there and say, okay, my teacher gave me feedback on this word problem. And they said that I need to use this formula, or I need to pay attention to the words in the problem. If it's social studies or ELA or any other topic, it could be, okay, my teacher is always identifying that I'm using the wrong verb tense, or I'm not using transition words. So we want to make sure it's actionable, something that the students can use and start applying. So as you kind of notice, we've been kind of talking about things that are also specific and goal reference. So again, our goal is to help improve our students. So help them grow. So again, has to be specific, not just like this paper was really well written, but you still need help with ideas. That's very vague for our students. If you're thinking about being specific, it could be something like highlighting or using some kind of method to remind them about using transition words. Or if it's something specific with math, it's like, showing your inverse operations. So something specific instead of saying that you didn't show their work. That's not specific enough for our students. So again, depending on your grade level, I know I teach mostly in the middle school, but I've used feedback with my youngest students when I taught second grade. You want to make sure that your feedback is user friendly. So for me, I'm not going to look at a student's, let's say we're doing narrative writing in second grade. I'm not going to sit there and highlight or comment on everything that that child needs to improve on. I'm going to make it user friendly and be like, okay, let's reread this. Let's read it out loud and see if it makes sense. And say, okay, let's see if we can break up our ideas using punctuation, giving them small little user friendly pieces of information. And they might need guide on the side to help them out. If we're talking about, our kids getting older, so user-friendly still. Like, I'm not going to sit there and just have a bunch of highlightings or comments made without it matching my students' language and what they're used to. And I might have to make it more user-friendly by saying, okay, here, let me teach you the language I'm using so you can use it. So with that being said, like the purpose and the goals and the kind of the ins and outs of feedback, now let's look at some ideas. I've kind of already mentioned a few, but let's look at some of my favorites and the ones that I've seen a lot of teachers use, and they are very effective for students. So one-on-one conferences, checklists and rubrics, Post-it notes, using that comment feature that you find in Google Suites, like the docs or the slides, or in the Office Suite if you're an office school. I also, as a math person, I love to highlight the errors and text for them to focus on. So again, these are the 5 that are common for most teachers, and they're kind of the ones that are easily used. And again, you're going to have to decide what's best for you. It makes the most sense for your students and for your own way that you teach. So looking at one-on-one conferences, when I worked with younger students, most of my feedback came in the form of one-on-one conferences. I would sit with kids with the papers, like math problems that they got wrong, and I would really focus on a specific area. So whether it was using the strategies to add up to numbers greater than 11. So using those strategies. So if it was place value. Didn't quite ask my younger students a lot of questions, but I might be able to say to them like, okay, looking at the ones you got wrong, what is common about that? A lot of times they can look for similarities and differences at the younger grade. For my older students, I can still focus on something very specific. And especially if it came to like writing papers in ELA, I can say, okay, what do you think I made the most comments on? And if they said, oh, I think it's about my ideas and supporting details, then that would be our focus. But again, I'm the teacher. I'm going to help guide them. Maybe I ask specific questions. So again, I want my students maybe to either be sitting there showing, starting to make improvements. And then when I feel like that they're at a good point where they can do it independently, I can say, okay, now go back to your seat and continue to work on this. And tomorrow morning, I would like it fixed, or if they're older for homework, or if they're younger, I'll be like, okay, at the end of 10 minutes, I'll collect it and see how you did. So again, I want my students to be able to not just have me doing all the corrections or the editing. I want them to get enough support and go back and do it on their own. So again, I like this because the one-on-one conferences gives me a chance to build that relationship with my students. And again, it lets me have them notice that, okay, you didn't do it very well this time, but let's see what you can do so we can improve it. And I usually will show them side by side, like, look at where your paper started and look at what you can do now. Checklists and rubrics is another way to give feedback. This is kind of like a traditional form of feedback. We probably remember this in our college prep classes. Obviously, we'd get that rubric, and it would be highlighted. But the one thing about when you just highlight a rubric is if you don't kind of attach it to the paper and kind of maybe make notes or say like, circling and labeling it A, and maybe that's your introduction topic and you're showing that, okay, this was really good, but, it's just that you need a little bit more work on it. So rubrics are really good, but you have to also teach your students on how to read the rubric and how to move from a 2 to a 3 or a 2 to a 4 or a 1 to a 3. So you have to take a little bit of time if you want it to be effective. You have to take time to teach it and have the students understand what is a good model for a 4 and all those different topics. For my younger students, obviously rubrics were a little bit more challenging, so checklists were really good. What's nice about a checklist is I could do it my side. I could let the kids kind of do their own little checklist, and then I can do it in different color, my opinion. So having them look and see, okay, I have a clear opinion about the topic, but maybe the teacher thinks of it a little bit different, and we can have that as part of our conference, and students can be able to work, and we kind of have a goal for our conference time. So again, checklists and rubrics can be very, very, really well done if you take the time and teach your students on how to use them and to explain what do you expect a 4 to look like or what mastery on a checklist looks like. Post-it notes are probably one of my favorite things to do, especially if we're doing like group projects or if we're doing posters. Here you can see a bunch of kids putting Post-it note feedback, which is the nice thing about feedback is if you are one of those teachers that loves cooperative learning, if you model feedback appropriately with students one-on-one, the students will pick up on it and they'll be able to start taking ownership and giving each other feedback using the methods that you use. So it kind of helps a lot with that collaborative classroom and getting kids to have positive and effective conversations with each other, especially if they're going to be working in a group, because you don't want that group to be at odds with each other and just angry because they're not receptive to each other's feedback. So there's a couple different ways you can do it. You could give each kid a different color Post-it note where it's like they could ask questions to the person who created it. Sometimes I've done different colors, like where I have a question, or maybe a different color Post-it note is something I want to highlight that they've done really well. So that 2-color Post-it note is like, here is your strengths and here's where you need to improve. Another thing you can do for feedback, this is more kind of simple student feedback. Give them Post-it notes and you're doing a topic. Specifically, like in math, this works really well. You can do like a problem on the board and you could have kids put a Post-it note out or a cup. I've seen the cups where it's the green, the yellow, and the red cup saying, I got this, I'm struggling with this problem, I'm stuck. So that's another way for feedback. It doesn't have to be specifically about their work. It could also be talking about their understanding. So when I had a stint teaching 8th grade ELA, I had students obviously submitting all their documents and their writing in Google Classroom and through Google Docs. So I became very fluent into using Google Docs and how to comment. And again, the big thing is not only do I just open up a comment box and highlight things, I try to avoid about doing the editing for the students. So again, I'm trying to have the kids do it because otherwise if I'm doing the editing and like I'm deleting things or adding things in, then the kids just start clicking away and say resolve, 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 resolve. And they really don't learn about what they need to change. So I would use the comment box where I would basically just highlight a section and tell about what I would like them to do with it. So again, I didn't sit there and move this sentence to the body of the essay. I actually just highlighted and said, you might want to move it to the body and shorten your first introduction paragraph. So this could be a supporting statement. So again, they actually had to go back and do more with what I was asking them to do. And I gave time, big thing, make class time for students to do this, because sending it home for homework, again, if they have questions, they have to wait till the next day to ask you, or they have to spend time sending me a message in Google Classroom, and there's almost no guarantee that I would see it before next class. So building time in for students to use those comments and ask you questions builds that effective feedback where they actually use it and they want to grow. So as a math teacher, my favorite thing to do is highlight. There's two ways to do it. Again, like the post notes, you could do different colors. You can say, okay, yellow is for, a mistake with the operations, or green is for, not paying attention to a part of what the word problem is asking, especially if it's like a two-part problem. Maybe orange is if there was a computational error. Again, I teach my students what my highlighting means. You can see an example on the other side is I sometimes only use one highlighting, but it's where it is in the problem. So I teach students like, okay, if I highlight the first line of the problem, that means that is where the mistake is. So let's take a look at what that mistake is. So if I highlight the end, that means, okay, your steps were appropriate, but at some point there was a computational error because the answer isn't going to necessarily be X is equal to -5. So I work with my students and have them know what the highlighting means and how to use it. So great way to get students to interact. And again, making time for students to make those corrections and use your highlighting is powerful, because otherwise what happens is if we say, okay, I want you to make corrections and use my highlighting, it goes into their math folder and they never pull it out. Some of them, the top 10% usually will make corrections. The other ones, it's in their folder. They forget about it. They don't use it for their tests. They don't know what mistakes they've made. Finally, I just want to make sure we talk about this. I mentioned it many times in this little bite-sized PD already, but make time. So you make your own time to give feedback. So whether it's your planning period or first thing in the morning or, late at night, you make the time to give feedback, but you also want to make sure your students use that feedback. So it's very, very important to make time for your students to apply it. So here are some suggestions I have for you if you're in a self-contained classroom morning work time. If you're like me and you have a 80-minute block every other day, maybe the first 5 or 10 minutes of class when you're passing out the work, give students a chance to look at it. They can use each other to make corrections. They can ask you questions as well. You can make it homework again. Just beware, your top 10% kids will always do it as part of homework. But if it's the only assignment that they have, and you know that they have a study hall or some time where they can reach out to you to ask questions, then homework would be an appropriate time. You can also, depending on what your classroom setup is, if you have centers, make it part of a center rotation. Give it some kind of catchy name, like this is our growth center, or something else that would be catchy to the students. So just a couple of little points to review. Make sure that whatever feedback you give, it's very purposeful. It's to give students an opportunity to make progress. You want to make sure that it's consistent, so make it a positive habit. So consistency is the most important, both in how you give the feedback, what you use, and how often you give the feedback. So again, that goes with timely, make it frequent and often, make sure you have time for students to apply it. And the methods, I just gave you a few methods. You can pick a method that works best for you and your students. You know your students the best, and you know the best way that they like to learn. You also know what you like. So whatever method works best for you. Because our ultimate goal, no matter what we do with our feedback, we want our students to develop that growth mindset, to make progress, and we want to build a positive relationship with our students where it's not just the teacher is just giving me a bad grade because they don't like me. No, my teacher is really there to help me. And that's the best thing that any of us want to do, is that we want to know that we're helping kids. And we also will be able to give students a model of how to give each other feedback, especially if we want to do groups and have the kids giving peer feedback or peer review. So these are just some really great points to remember as you're thinking about this next coming school year and how you want to have your students giving each other feedback and how you want to give feedback to your students.